All right, good morning, everybody. We will get started with our LionSide Chat in just a minute. Welcome to our chat. All right, welcome to Penn State Berks LionSide Chats. Come on in, welcome to our campus. We're so glad you could join us today. My name is Ryan Hassler. I'm one of 3 LionSide Chat moderators working alongside Don Pfeiffer-Wrights and Sonia De La Cueto. Before we get started, we want to share with you that you should please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A feature here of the webinar. We will not be utilizing the raise hand feature, but at the conclusion of the presentation, we will facilitate a discussion with our panelists here today. So we'll also be recording today's session so that you can revisit the topic and share this experience with friends and family. So I am now excited to introduce Dr. Joe Mahoney for a special presentation related to National Biomechanics Day. So Joe, welcome and thanks for joining us. And
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for introducing
us.
All right, let me share this. All right, I think we're good here. All right, so welcome everyone to National Biomechanics Day 2021 edition. Obviously this special virtual edition that we're having here. I'm Dr. Joe Mahoney, part of Mechanical Engineering and Kinesiology departments at Penn State Berks. I'm joined by Dr. Singles, also in both departments, and Dr. Infantolino in Kinesiology. And we'll be presenting today about biomechanics, what Penn State Berks is doing, what in general people in biomechanics do, and how it might relate to interests that you have in science and engineering and in health. All right, so before we get into the biomechanics part, what we first want to get on the same page on is what is biomechanics, since that's what for an hour today we're going to be discussing. Well, we can start with the pure definition of the word as a fine place to start. So biomechanics made up of bio and mechanics. So bio, like in biology, is living, or the prefix means something that's living, and mechanics in general means motion. So just by the word, the very general definition of what we're looking at are the motion of living things. Now, most of us in the biomechanics world are looking at human motion, but that doesn't mean we can't be looking at the motion of fish, which is really popular, or other mammals, or mantis shrimp, or a whole host of other living things, even plants, and the way that they move. So it is pretty broad. And when we're talking about movement, we're not necessarily just talking about waving our hands in the air, but also what our heart does, how it acts as a pump, how blood moves through our veins, how we take air in and out. All sorts of movement inside our body, on our body, is of interest to us. But really what we do, we can generalize to solving problems that involve disease, movement disorders, increasing accessibility for people with they're differently abled physically, creating prosthetics for people that have maybe damaged limbs or have lost limbs, and looking at how we could increase sport performance by studying athletes and coming up with training regimens or different types of equipment. So most of the work for doing this type of activity is going to incorporate a lot of math and physics and engineering, and on the health side, medicine and health sciences there, and also sports medicine. So there's a lot of certainly technical aspects of what we do, technical like using computers and math and physics and science, but also there's a side that's, I'll say, less technical or more human interaction type of things. We work with people a lot of times. So most of us don't just purely work in a lab in front of a computer and never interact with the outside world. We need to work in teams. We need to work with the people that need our help in moving. And to that end, the work we do is extremely interdisciplinary with these different topics that we are working with in the technical, non-technical side. There's going to be people that are trained as scientists and engineers, definitely. But a lot of projects we do, we're working with physicians. So with medical doctors that have a practice or work in a hospital that see patients every day that have some kind of issue that we might be able to help solve or study. We work certainly with physical therapists, so looking at best ways for people to be rehabilitated after they had a surgery or are recovering from an injury. Working directly with athletes, improving their performance, and ultimately working with patients themselves. If we're collecting data, we need to find the people that are affected by something and then be able to bring them in the lab or put some sensors on them. So again, it's a range of things that we're looking at, from observing people walking in our lab or in the wild, to studying how muscles are activated while people are moving, or like I said earlier, kind of going inside the body and looking at how blood is flowing. So it's a wide range of motions that we look at. So what we have next is a video from our lab, from our research group, that's going to be able to dive a little bit more into some things that the three of us are working on. So let me share that. Try that again. There we go. Something that most of us do every day is walk, jog, or run somewhere. We do this activity without even thinking about it. However, this is something that biomechanists think about a lot. There are many considerations about how people locomote. How do they move their limbs? What are their muscles doing? How are they breathing? How much energy are they using? Today we are going to break down this seemingly simple task and analyze and overanalyze it through different lenses that biomechanists use. 3 biomechanists from our campus are going to present an overview of what they are using to analyze this motion.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ben Infantolino. I'm an associate professor of kinesiology at Penn State Berks. I was interested in science and math in high school, and I ran track, so I was interested in human performance. And during college, I majored in athletic training, and through an undergraduate research opportunity, I got involved in the biomechanics lab, where I started using ultrasound to look at muscles in my leg as it moved. I was fascinated by it, so I continued down that track, and now I study muscle mechanics for my research focus. We begin for EMG by cleaning off the area that we want to, above the muscle we want to look at. Cleaning off the skin provides better data quality. The first muscle we'll be looking at is the vastus lateralis. It's on the front outside of the leg. It acts to extend the knee or straighten the knee. So use some double-sided tape to stick the electrode to the skin. The next muscle we'll be looking at is the bicep femoris. Bicep femoris is in the back outside part of the leg. It acts to extend the hip and flex the knee, or pull your leg back behind you and bend your knee. And the last muscle we'll look at here is the gastrocnemius. Gastrocnemius helps to flex the knee as well as plantar flex the foot, or bend your knee and point your toes. The gastrocnemius is part of the calf muscle as well. It's on the back side of your leg there. The next thing we're going to look at is using the ultrasound system here. So we'll use a probe to look at the muscle itself in terms of imaging the muscle during walking. So we use a little bit of gel to increase the acoustical coupling between the ultrasound probe and the skin so we get a better image. Initially here, what we're doing is just making sure we're getting a good image, making sure we're over the muscle we want to look at, and then we have the subject move through the range of motion to ensure that during the range of motion, what we want to see is captured throughout the whole range of motion. Once we're in a good spot, we use medical tape in order to affix the probe to the leg while the subject is walking. We use a lot of tape because as the subject walks, the probe moves, could move around a bit, so we want to make sure it is secure during the entire test. And using EMG and ultrasound is very, very helpful for biomechanists. We'll be able to see what the muscle is doing visually, as far as the arrangement of muscle is concerned, and then the EMG will provide information in terms of how the muscle is being activated and when the muscle is being activated during a particular task. You can see here, this is what you would see during walking. The green is the vastus lateralis, the blue is the biceps femoris, the pink is the gastrocnemius. You can see that during walking, you've got very, very nice, clear on-off times for the vastus lateralis. Gastrocnemius does have some on-off times, but they're not as clear because as you're moving through the gastrocnemius is relatively active actually during the whole time. On the left, you see around, and then as the subject goes into running, you'll be able to see things speed up, both on the ultrasound as well as the EMG would speed up, so you can measure what happens, what changes are occurring as the subject starts to run.
Hi, I'm Dr. Allison Altman-Singles, an assistant professor of kinesiology and mechanical engineering at Penn State Berks. I was a cross-country and track and field athlete throughout high school and college, and I suffered many various types of sports injuries. Since I was always interested in math and science, I was naturally driven to the field of biomechanics, where I could better understand the mechanical causes of overuse injuries. Now at Penn State Berks, I continue to study this relationship between repetitive mechanical loading and injury in various types of athletes. I also look at how these high loading patterns can be reduced through subtle alterations in mechanics, like changing the way your foot strikes the ground or taking shorter steps. As I mentioned, one of my research objectives is to better understand the mechanical risk factors for injury. This video shows how we can use biomechanics to measure how hard an individual hits the ground during running, which is one example of a mechanical risk factor for injury. This quantity is called the ground reaction force, and it can be measured using force plates, these purple things in the floor, and it's shown with the red arrow and graphically on the right. The height of this first peak in the graph characterizes a person's impact loading. High impact loading is one mechanical risk factor that's known to cause several running overuse injuries like IT band syndrome, foot pain, or bone stress fractures. Using motion analysis cameras, we can also get three-dimensional pictures of how a person's bones and joints move during motion. This is shown on the left. Using a combination of motion analysis and force plates, biomechanists can identify risk factors for injury and help avoid these risk factors with tools such as gait retraining or physical therapy. Biomechanics is a great tool to analyze motion. Let's go to an example where we can explore what running and walking look like as you develop from a baby into adulthood. Shown here are 3 generations of men in my family running across the beach. We can use simple biomechanics measurements to understand differences in their gait patterns that we may be able to detect with our eyes, but biomechanics gives us a language and a methodology to measure these differences. You can begin to detect some of these differences in their gait patterns, especially with the youngest at age 2. Let's start by looking at normal walking. Once we reach about 4 years old, we've developed what's referred to as a mature gait pattern. Mature gait patterns are characterized by a distinct heel-to-toe pattern with a flexed ankle at the initial contact. Mature gait implies that the individual can walk at a sufficient speed for community involvement with regular, cyclical motion of each foot, minimizing the amount of time the foot is in contact with the ground. Mature gait is also associated with regular arm swing and a narrow base of support or step width. Here you see that each subsequent foot strikes almost directly in front of the other to achieve this narrow base of support associated with mature gait. As babies grow, learning to walk marks a crucial milestone in healthy development. The timing of this milestone varies substantially, but typically occurs between 8 and 18 months of age. Shown in this video is a 13-month-old baby learning to take her first consecutive steps. You can see her motivation for walking is to get to the toy, which is already different from why most of us walk. We can use biomechanics to determine and understand that babies display minimal joint motion and are irregular in their limb motions compared to adults. They land with a flat foot rather than that heel-to-toe motion that we saw in mature gait, and they tend to spend more time with the feet on the ground. Here we see that widened base of support compared to her hip width, and the lack of arm swing as she walks, using her arms instead for balance. Amazingly enough, babies learn in a very short time to achieve more consistent gait patterns. At just 23 months, this baby is showing much more regular gait pattern, though you can see his motivation is still not comparable to an adult's. But he's beginning to develop that heel-toe pattern and a clear arm swing. From the front, we can see that the toddler only has a regular arm swing with one arm, while the other has still not caught up. And while his base of support is more narrow than the 13-month-old, it's still easy to see that the footsteps are not directly in front of one another. It's amazing to see how quickly we adopt this mature gait pattern. Here we can see the same toddler compared to his 4-year-old brother. The 4-year-old already displays the characteristics of mature gait, that heel-to-toe walking, regular cyclical motion of his limbs, minimal time with the foot on the ground, and a regular arm swing. When we look back at adults walking, this gait pattern is still maintained as we age beyond 70. Many individuals do begin to adapt their gait as they get into older age. Some gait adaptations are similar to those we have as toddlers, such as a widened base of support, loss of that heel-to-toe pattern, and decreased joint range of motion and arm swing. Here we can see the man in the foreground is beginning to develop some of the stooped posture and forward lean that we see as we age. This stooped posture can be an early indicator that gait adaptations may follow that could lead to slower walking speeds and eventually some loss of independence. Biomechanics again gives us a language and methodology to better understand how these various factors lead to gait adaptations and how to develop training programs to maintain healthy gait as we age.
I'm Dr. Joseph Mahoney, an associate professor of mechanical engineering and kinesiology. My background is in design and optimization in mechanical engineering, and I became interested in biomechanics while in graduate school. In my research, I often take things I learned and used in classical engineering and computer programming and apply them to biomechanics problems. Working in biomechanics allows me to draw from a wide range of interdisciplinary ideas to solve challenges. We can collect data from people moving in our lab or out in the wild using wearable sensors. Many of us are already wearing sensors all of the time in the form of a wristband like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, or have them stored in our pocket in the form of a phone. These sensors are collecting movement data all the time, and these data can be used to gain insights about our physical activity and our health in general. Here we see Dr. Altman-Singles walking and running on our treadmill. She's wearing a specialized sensor on her ankle that has an accelerometer and a gyroscope in it that are recording her ankle's acceleration and angular velocity, respectively, as she moves. We will focus on what the acceleration reveals, though the gyroscope would give us some similar insights. Here's what the acceleration typically looks like while she's walking, jogging, or running. This zoomed-in snapshot from her motion on the treadmill comes from 90 seconds of her walking and running and jogging on it. We see basically a repeating pattern as walking and running is repetitive, especially on a treadmill that moves at a constant speed like this. From the data, we can see every time her foot strikes the treadmill by the high acceleration at the impact. Simply looking at these plots does not give us too much insight into the differences between her gait patterns when she's walking or jogging or running. They make nice pictures for us, but what do we learn? We can, however, look beyond just each individual stride that she takes and look at what the strides look like on average for each of these gait types and patterns. We can record many strides like this, find the start of each cycle when her foot hits the treadmill, and then stack them all on top of each other. Looking at all the data in aggregate form reveals noticeable differences in each gait pattern. These colored bands show the spread of the acceleration data for each of the gait patterns over about 50 strides. The blue band, the data from her walking, shows a later middle peak value, around 60% of the gait cycle. The gait cycle is the time from one foot's impact to the next. The peak value for running happens earlier in the gait cycle, closer to 50%. Similarly, the valley of the walking occurs around 80% of the gait cycle, while running is closer to around 70%. And the jogging is happening somewhere in between the walking and the running. Now, right now we're looking at data only from Dr. Altman singles running on this particular treadmill. However, if we collect data from many people with many different anthropometries or body dimensions, we've seen similar results. If we can detect these differences just by eye, a computer should be really good at detecting them. We can use a technique called machine learning to find these distinguishing features and automatically classify data as coming from walking, jogging, or running. Once classified, a physical activity monitor can do a better job at keeping track of not only if you are moving, but how were you moving. A 30-minute run is much different than a 30-minute walk. Okay, let me get back into this. And I will hand it over to there we are. Back to Dr. Singles.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you appreciated some of those different ways we can look at moving on a treadmill or movement in general. There's a variety of different ways that we didn't talk about. So I just want to talk a little bit more about other ways we can use biomechanics. Biomechanics helps us physically experience our complex environment. We can feel the forces on our body. We can feel how we're moving and accelerating. We can feel the forces produced by our muscles and at our joints. And we can feel how our body hits the ground and makes a ground reaction force. It allows us to kind of understand physics in the lens of our body. Biomechanics also allows us to understand how we interact with our environment. We get a language for it being able to explain why a door handle is on the opposite side of the door to the hinges. Biomechanics helps us design specialized equipment that can interact with the body, like stuff that's used by NASA or the military, or exoskeletons or things like that. It can help us to understand why we design a desk chair the way we design a desk chair, or why we have our driver's seat in our car angled a certain way to reach the pedal. So biomechanics gives us a language and a method for understanding that kind of information. Biomechanics also allows us to analyze sports. We can look at sport performance biomechanically and optimize sport performance through biomechanical measures. And we can also look at why we get injured and how to rehabilitate those injuries through biomechanics. So biomechanics is really a part of everything that we do. Penn State has a very rich history in biomechanics, so I think it's important to bring that out at this point. Penn State had one of the first biomechanics labs in the world in 1967. And in that lab, Dr. Richard Nelson was able to bring biomechanics from a qualitative science where we were just observing things to a quantitative science where we could actually make measurements to assign numbers to the phenomenon that were happening through our bodies. If you've been to State College, you might have seen the old water tower biomechanics lab. Now it's mostly used for teaching or as sort of a more historical relic, but that there is a very cool historical marker outside of that biomechanics lab. And again, Penn State has a very rich history in biomechanics. The grandfathers of biomechanics were all at Penn State. They together founded the International Society of Biomechanics in 1973, and eventually the American Society of Biomechanics, they helped to form that as well later on. Dewey Morehouse, which was one of those grandfathers of biomechanics, in addition to Richard Nelson, he worked with the International Olympic Committee to develop a medical commission initiative to prevent athletic injuries in Olympic athletes. So that was the first kind of person that was taking a quantitative biomechanics approach to preventing injuries in athletes. And then Peter Kavanaugh was another of these grandfathers of biomechanics at Penn State, and he developed the treadmill that's still used on the International Space Station by NASA's astronauts and other countries' astronauts, and it helps to prevent bone and muscle loss when you're spending time in space. Biomechanics is a very small field in terms of, or in comparison to some of the other sciences. And so it's kind of cool that we have this very rich history at Penn State. And many of us have come from a lineage from these Penn State grandfathers of biomechanics. So my PhD advisor's advisor was Dr. Peter Kavanaugh. So I'm like a granddaughter of the grandfather of biomechanics. With that, we just wanted to talk a little bit about why we became a biomechanist. I just wanted to talk a little bit about my background. I mentioned it briefly in the video. I was an athlete all through high school and in college. I got interested in kind of the way we could assign mechanical components or electrical components to the body to kind of mimic biological processes. So I majored in biomedical engineering at the University of Rochester. Then I went on to get a PhD at the University of Delaware in biomechanics and movement science, master's and a PhD, and where I looked closer at the biomechanics of injury risk in runners. And so I thought that was really cool how I could do that. Then I went on to do a postdoc in orthopedic biomechanics, where I looked further at bone injuries and osteoporosis and how we could image that process of injury and disease. Now I continue to study a lot of that same stuff here at Penn State Berks, where I'm looking at the implications of mechanical loading on overuse injuries. I think that brings us to Dr. Mahoney.
Okay, thank you. So my background is in, at least academically, was in mechanical engineering, which was my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. And really, I did know, probably until I started my PhD, I hadn't done any biology since high school. So I had a very classic mechanical engineering training in design and optimization, like I said in the video, not really doing anything with the human body. So once I started my PhD work, my advisor was involved in biomechanics, kind of by chance, I guess. I chose to work with him, and we started to do some biomechanics studies. So the picture here, the third one on the right, is in our shared movement and gait lab at Penn State in State College, where we did, my first study was looking at Parkinson's disease and looking at people with asymmetric arm swings, which was very typical habit, I guess, or something observable for people with newly diagnosed Parkinson's and developed Parkinson's. So this really got me into the field of how I could be applying the knowledge and skills I gained from my previous degrees and my previous training to hopefully actually be able to help people either through diagnosis or treatment or developing some sort of aid in having people, in how people move and how people walk, or having people be able to live better lives. So that was kind of my first foray into it that got me interested in keeping with that and pursuing that through my PhD and into my work now at Penn State Berks. So when I got to Penn State Berks, well, we didn't have at that time the giant lab like I had in State College during my PhD. That lab was several $100,000 built out over many years and took up a big chunk of space. And at least at that time, we didn't have that at Penn State Berks. So I was interested in, well, how can I get a lot of that data I've been using in the past at a low cost in a low space? So really that's where I started my work here, was trying to replicate some of the measures we were taking with $100,000 equipment for things that we could build for a couple $100. Certainly not the same quality, but could we at least get data that was useful at a much, much lower cost? Now, luckily, since then, we have been able to build out what we have. We're having a brand new lab built and hopefully done in the fall. So we're going to have some of that really nice equipment, and we have some of the lower cost things that we're going to be able to do some comparisons with. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Infantolino.
Hi. So my images, I guess, are on the far right. So in terms of academically speaking, my undergrad was in athletic training, and I enjoyed working with clinical populations. I enjoyed seeing people come back from injury, working with them for rehabilitation, et cetera. And by chance, I was doing a senior thesis. I needed a supervisor, so I asked the person who was teaching the biomechanics class on the second day of class, because I liked physics and biomechanics sounded cool. So I asked him if he would supervise me. So he said, well, let's see how you get on in my lab. So I started working in his lab, and one of the first things we started to work on was he had obtained an ultrasound machine, and he said, well, why don't you and this other grad student start looking at this ultrasound machine, just see what you can get out of it, start playing with it. So we were playing with it, and we were playing with it for a good number of hours on a Friday afternoon, and it was fascinating to stick an ultrasound machine, stick the probe on your leg, move your leg, and oh wow, you could see the muscles move. So from there, I was quite hooked in this whole area called biomechanics. So about 6 years later, I had a PhD under this same advisor. I stayed with the same advisor through all my degrees, master's degree and a PhD in biomechanics. I focused primarily on muscle using all sorts of different methods: ultrasound, MRI, cadaveric dissection, computer modeling, really looking at fine level how muscle produces force, and then also how variability in muscle affects that ability to produce force. And that's continued to my current research, which is still really focusing on muscle mechanics and looking at that variability. When you think about it, the variability we have across many bodies is pretty large, right? You think about height, weight, mass, et cetera, of different individuals. But when you look at movement is very, very stereotypical. If we look across the population, the toe clearance during walking is going to be about an inch off the ground for pretty much everyone, even though the mass of the individual's muscles, the arrangement of the different muscles is quite different. So from that standpoint, understanding how that variability can then all combine together to provide something that is very invariable is quite an interesting aspect of research for me. So that's where I came from and where I'm currently at for research. So I'll just kind of move to the next segment here to talk about kind of Penn State Berks and biomechanics and how those two things go together. So in terms of what we have at Penn State, we have some four-year programs, certainly mechanical engineering, kinesiology, as well as rehabilitation and human services. They're all related to biomechanics in some form or fashion. Certainly engineering and kinesiology are represented here, so you can see those connections quite well. We do have over 20 majors on campus at Penn State Berks, and depending upon what emphasis you're looking at, certainly biomechanics can come into play there as well. I've kind of shown you that biomechanics is everywhere. We have the 2-year degree in occupational therapy assistant. Again, biomechanics is going to be quite present in those clinical fields. And of course, we are at Penn State campus, so we have the 2+2 scenario. So start a major at Penn State for 2 years and then finish your 2 years at another campus for any majors. Some of the majors that probably highlight would be biomedical engineering and industrial engineering, two areas of study that also closely relate to biomechanics. In fact, during my graduate studies, I took courses in both of these areas for my my graduate degrees. So we also have a minor in kinesiology, and as you pick your classes for the minor, you can pick courses to put yourself on what we would call biomechanics track. It would emphasize the biomechanical aspects of kinesiology. So you could really kind of highlight this area of biomechanics within a kinesiology minor at Penn State Berks. Also at Penn State Berks, we have the Human Movement Research Center. So 3 faculty here are all members of that research group. And it's an interdisciplinary research group that is interested in human movement, which of course biomechanics is central to that. And it is quite interdisciplinary in terms of not just kinesiology and engineering is represented. We have people from math, applied psychology, a very, very broad area of individuals to really look at movement from a very, very broad perspective. And it's amazing what happens when you start to combine perspectives across disciplines. The very, very interesting research that you can, in fact, get done. And that works well from a faculty perspective and a research perspective. However, it also works very, very nicely from a student perspective, because it allows students in different disciplines to expose themselves to different disciplines outside of their major, and they learn quite a bit from that as well. Plus, it allows students with varied interests to tap into those varied interests and not just one area of their major. Another thing we do at Penn State Berks, as you kind of hopefully are aware, is National Biomechanics Day. Typically, we're hosting it on campus in early April. This year's a bit different, so we're doing it now. Again, if you're not aware, sorry. But and look forward to next year. Hopefully, we'll be doing this in person. And then the final thing is the American Society of Biomechanics, which is our national professional organization of biomechanists in the nation. We have hosted the regional conference, the East Coast Biomechanics Conference, on campus, typically in the spring. Again, hopefully next year we'll have it in person again, and it has been free for high school students to attend. So you can, get your feet wet, get a sense of what is all this biomechanics going on here, and take a look at that for free. We are in an area, geographically speaking, of very, very strong biomechanics programs. So we actually draw quite a lot of large names from the biomechanics field coming to our conference, which is quite neat for everyone to be able to see and interact with those individuals. In terms of careers in biomechanics, what can you do with it? Well, I mean, the sort of somewhat obvious is do what we do, as it were, right? So you get a graduate degree or two, and you can teach and do those things. Other areas, though, are you can get into areas that are purely research. There are individuals we know in our community, biomechanics community, who focus solely on research, either from they're working at a nationally funded laboratory, or with the VA, or a private company. There are private companies that do employ people, Nike obviously being the easy one that everyone jumps to, but other companies as well. Other companies, instrumentation, software industries. So many of the companies that we work with regards to our equipment, our force plates, our motion analysis, etc., they were started by biomechanists. They're owned by biomechanists, and they employ biomechanists. So those are areas. Medical consulting, medical sales are other areas that people with a biomechanics background can get into, as well as prosthetists and orthotists. Those individuals have backgrounds in biomechanics, or can have backgrounds in biomechanics, helping make prosthetics. They can also partner with biomechanists who are looking to design the next generation of these devices. And then certainly allied health field clinicians, physical therapy, physician assistant, athletic trainer, doctor, nurse, OTA, PTA, all these areas as well are going to have some component to biomechanics in them. Certainly understanding the underlying mechanics of the human body will help you understand injury, will help you understand rehabilitation. So these areas as well can benefit from some background in biomechanics. So now I believe we're going over to James McCarty to discuss some opportunities at Berks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Infantolino. Also, Dr. Altman-Singles and Dr. Mahoney for allowing me to be here today and talk a little bit about Penn State Berks. My name is James McCarty, and I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions here. Just really quick before I forget, I see that many of you have already registered as attending today, but I just posted a link in the chat. If you have not signed in for this event today, please feel free to do so. I see that many of you attending are current Penn State or Penn State Berks students, but we do have some attendees today who are prospective students. So very briefly, I'd like to just share with those of you that are prospective students some of the opportunities that you have with us at Penn State Berks. First and foremost, our Cohen-Hemel Fellows Program. This is a new fellowship program started about 2 years ago. Each year, we select 4 students to be inducted as a Cohen Fellow. I think the big draw to this program is that there's a $7,000 scholarship per year if you're selected as one of those 4 fellows. Each of those 4 students has to be in a Berks specific major. So essentially planning to do your entire degree of study here at the Berks campus. You're also allotted a special academic advisor to help work with you throughout your studies here. And really, this fellow program is supposed to help foster students to dive even deeper into their research and their studies here. There's also funding opportunities for students to be able to present their research, locally and nationally as well. So this is a new fellows program. And again, this is something specific to us here at Penn State Berks. We also offer our Engineering Ahead program. This is a summer bridge program actually offered by Dr. Ryan Hassler, who's here today. So if you have any more questions or more specific questions, I'm sure Dr. Hassler can jump in. But this is a great program to help lay the foundation in math and science for any students in high school to prepare you for your upcoming college studies. So this program takes place during the summer between graduating from high school and starting with us. And the focus of this program, again, is to help better prepare you for that first semester of math and science. We also offer the Berks Honors Program as well as the Schreier Honors Program here at Penn State Berks as well. You can begin both of those as well as graduate in both of those programs with us at Penn State Berks. Penn State Berks is actually one of only 7 campuses that students can graduate as a Schreier Honors Scholar. So Schreier's is the university-wide honors program at every Penn State campus. And again, you also have the Berks Honors Program available as well. And there are different scholarship opportunities available for students, both academically in regards to research, even studying abroad that are allotted through these different honors programs. Similar to the Cohen-Hamel Fellows, any of these honors opportunities are a great way for you to delve even deeper into your own studies. And how I like to describe it, really take ownership of what you're learning and how you're learning it. We want you to come and visit us early, often, as many times as possible. So right now, just some upcoming admissions events. We are offering on-campus tours. Those are taking place Monday through Friday. We have 2 tour times each day, and there's also some special weekend Saturday tour opportunities as well. We have a large accepted student program coming up April 17th. So if any of you are seniors that have an offer of admission, we would love to have you join. That is a wonderful program where we have different campus constituents from many of our offices all across campus, from financial aid, academic advising, campus life, residence life, you name it. We have every office represented. So it's a great program to kind of better understand Penn State Berks and the process to enrolling with us for the upcoming fall. We're also offering a Saturday tour day for juniors that will also be taking place April 17th later in the day. So again, for any of you that are younger in high school, we would love to have you come and visit campus. There's a webinar specifically for living on campus. So our housing and food services has a program to talk about what it's like to live on campus. Give me more information about meal plans, different dining options. So again, that is taking place April 27th. And probably most importantly, again, we want to see you here on campus early, often, as much as possible. And a benefit to coming and visiting and more importantly, staying connected with us is that we are happy to waive application fees. So if you ever reach out and come to campus for a tour, you set up an individual meeting, or you attend any of our larger open house programs, we do waive application fees. All that we need is for you to create a My Penn State account, the place where you'll apply, and we can go in and proactively waive that application fee to save you $65 and not have to pay that out to apply to Penn State. Some bigger, just general information. I think if anything good came from COVID this last year, many colleges and universities are now test optional, and that includes us at Penn State. We have announced that we will be test optional through fall 2023. That's been approved by the the president's cabinet. I can definitely tell you that us in admissions are really pushing to keep this permanent moving forward. So we're hopeful that Penn State will be a test optional institution even further out. But again, for the immediate future, we are definitely test optional through at least fall 2023. So again, please visit us, stay connected. In just a moment, I'm going to put the website in the chat for the Cohen-Hamel Fellows Program. And I'm also going to be putting my personal contact information as well as the admissions office's general contact information. I always say that you should never go through this process alone. Applying to college and being an enrolled student can be a very overwhelming process, but know that you're not going through this alone. Please stay connected early and often, and we're always here to help. So I want to thank you all. I will put those links in the chat, and I'm going to pass things back to, I think, Dr. Mahoney, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. All right, so that is what we have for our kind of prepared segment today. So now we want to open it up for questions. So hopefully some have been coming in through the Q&A, or now you can take an opportunity to ask some questions about what we presented, what we do here, what people in the biomechanics community do, or engineering at large, or science at large that we can talk about. And Dr. Hassler will help us out here of moderating some discussion on those points.
Yeah, so I don't see any Q&As yet from the audience, but please go ahead and submit them. I'm going to start the questioning with throwing this question to either or any of the three of you who'd like to answer. But can you compare and contrast how physical therapy, athletic training, and occupational therapy would use biomechanics in a clinical practice? So maybe the different, career paths, how are they intertwined, or how are they connected to biomechanics?
Sure, I can speak to that. So in terms of how they're the same, I guess, I would tend to view them as the same, as from the standpoint that the basic application of biomechanics is going to be the same, right? You're looking at some sort of injury, and then a force created some sort of injury to a bone, a tendon, a muscle. And so whether that individual injured their hand, and you're going to see more of an occupational therapy type of event, a knee injury to an individual, which could then be either a physical therapy scenario or an athletic training scenario, right? All those scenarios are the same from the standpoint we have an excessive amount of force applied to some sort of biological tissue. Where they're different is probably going to be based upon the population you're looking at and how much stress can you place upon those tissues that are healing. In a geriatric population, probably looking at a little less stress. In an athletic training population, probably a little bit more stress. So that's how they would differ. But I would say, I would tend to see them more similar than different.
Great.
In terms of how they're related to biomechanics, I just want to add to that. I got my biomechanics degree within a physical therapy department. So biomechanics, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and athletic training are all very, very interrelated. Biomechanics, like Dr. Ben said, is a component in all three of those allied health fields and many other allied health fields, but it can be a thing all of its own as well.
I think this next question from an audience member might go to you, Dr. Singles, but anybody else can chime in. The question is, when looking at ankle acceleration during running, have there been studies done, or have you noticed differences in acceleration with changes in foot strike patterns?
Thanks for asking that. I think that is something Dr. Mahoney and I are actually working very hard on right now. And the truth is, yes, there are differences in ankle acceleration during running with different foot strike patterns. We've been working over the last about a year and a half now, developing, or maybe almost 2 years, using machine learning paradigms to identify those differences in acceleration to try to work towards a wearable device that can identify foot strike pattern in real time. So yes, there are differences. I would say that in general, rear foot strikers have like a higher positive tibial acceleration or ankle acceleration, whereas a forefoot striker would have more of an oscillating tibial acceleration, so a high, not as high of a positive peak, but also a high negative peak. So it kind of looks more like a like a up and down sine wave kind of thing. And then the midfoot strikers are somewhere in the middle. So we do have differences in that tibial acceleration for foot strike patterns. Thanks. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to add on a little bit. So there's some things like in the charts I showed in my segment in the video. Now that wasn't foot strike pattern, but still, if we compare like a forefoot striker to a rear foot striker and we plot out the acceleration, there might be some obvious things, and there certainly are some obvious things that we can see different between them. But I guess it's an upside and a downside of using like machine learning, which is very hot right now, is that the computer can detect things that we can't see between the patterns that might be, they're just not obvious or we wouldn't even think to look for. Now, some of those differences between the patterns might be, it could be just coincidence in the data that we collected. But if we measure across a lot of people, running a lot of different ways in a lot of different settings, then hopefully we're not picking up on just coincidences of the differences, but real differences that the computer can observe that we cannot. But on the downside, it's sometimes hard to get the computer, so the computer might be able to be really good at saying this came from a forefoot, this came from a rear foot, but having it explain to us why it knows that is sometimes very difficult, unfortunately.
Just to add one more thing to that, that's pretty exciting. Hopefully, I think you'll find it exciting, is that we are getting access to a huge data set of runners in the Boston Marathon and using that to help drive our machine learning paradigm. So getting access to cool sports events to drive our work is one of the perks of being a sport biomechanist as well.
Maybe going along with, getting access to new data sets, there is a question from somebody in our audience here that asks about our current remodel of the Beaver Community Center. So can you touch upon maybe how the remodel will support what's happening with biomechanics here at Penn State Berks?
Absolutely. We had currently, or previously to this remodel, we had one shared quasi-lab space for the kinesiology and mechanical engineering departments where we did some biomechanics research. If you've been there, it is a little cluttered and currently mostly dust now that they've started the renovation. But when we have the new renovation, we will have a dedicated state-of-the-art biomechanics lab to do this kind of research in. And as Dr. Mahoney mentioned in his background, that at the time when he started, we did not have that. But now we will have a biomechanics lab that is similar in quality and size to that at University Park. So I think that this will give us a huge advantage in the region in establishing Penn State Berks as a strong place to do biomechanics work.
I think to add on to that a second, well, Dr. Singles was on the planning committee for the building, but I think we also want to point out that not only is there a new, bigger, better, way better biomechanics lab, but also an exercise physiology lab on its own that's going to be right next door. So in kind of the broader biomechanics sense, I would count exercise physiology kind of as a neighbor of what we do. So they're going to have a great new space as well as other new facilities for this type of work.
Dr. Ben, maybe I can throw this question to you. We were talking about exercise science there maybe, and so we have the kinesiology degree on our campus. So can you maybe just do a little bit of comparison between kinesiology and exercise science?
Yeah, so kinesiology and exercise science are just really two different names for the same thing. It's kind of a tricky thing. So essentially, as our discipline grew from a historical perspective, right, we have this sort of very standard, ologies, geology, biology, et cetera, right? And they sound very nice. And so one of the things you can do is you can, create a name, so kines, movement, ology, study of, so kinesiology, study of movement. And it sounds wonderful and it makes sense, but no one can spell it and no one knows what it is. So then you take a different approach. You call exercise science, because everyone knows what exercise is and everyone knows what science is. And you put those two things together and you got this thing called exercise science. So, unfortunately or fortunately, different institutions have gone different directions. Penn State has chosen the kinesiology name, and then we went to name our option. We used exercise science. So we kind of have double dipped there on the names in that case. So depending upon what institution you're looking at, it'll be exercise science, kinesiology, or some such thing variant like that. So that's the difference, is there's really none actually.
Okay, thank you. We do have time for a couple more questions perhaps. So if anybody else has a question, please feel free to submit it. I did hear and see in the video the importance of mathematics in biomechanics. As a mathematician myself, I don't want to downplay that, but for our high school students who are watching, what are some suggestions for classes that if they're interested in this field that they might be taking in high school to prepare themselves for this study once they get to their undergraduate degree?
I guess I'll jump in first here. I think we all have a good opinion on this from the engineering side. Well, I guess first I want to point out that I think all three of us come from a certainly more technical side, mathematical side of the field. But for students that are not as inclined towards, let's say, especially the math, but maybe you like science and you like working with people, there's still a lot of opportunity that does not involve heavy amounts of math, that you can still work with other people that might be more skilled or like the math more, and you can do other things in the field. From a engineering standpoint, though, if you are interested in mechanical engineering and maybe as part of that looking at biomechanics, certainly being able to take Calculus 1 in high school would be great, or at least being ready to take Calculus 1 the first semester you come to college. So for pretty much, I would say, almost any engineering program at Penn State or at other schools, being prepared for Calc 1 your first semester is going to set you on track to be able to graduate on time. Now, on the engineering side, we have, for mechanical engineering, I want to say 5 semesters just of courses labeled as math courses. And then you get to junior year, and now we have mechanical engineering courses. But you might not know this going in, and it's fair if you don't, but mechanical engineering is kind of applied math. So you're going to have another 2 years of now using the math, the knowledge you had in your math courses, and applying it to engineering classes. So it is math heavy. I don't want to downplay that or trick anyone there, but definitely math, physics, and using those things is going to be huge, as well as statistics, which I really, really push. And we were talking about machine learning earlier. Really, machine learning is just a very fancy word for statistics, where you let the computer really do all the work for you.
Yeah, so kinesiology has much less of a math emphasis. Kinesiology degree only requires you to take algebra, which many of you take in high school. So that's an advantage to kinesiology. And I will say that I think some of my students might be in the audience and might be able to attest to this, but as a kinesiology major, you may come in and say, like, I'm horrible at math, it's not my thing, I don't like it. But by taking biomechanics, it helps you to contextualize some of that math and give it a reason, give it a physical presence, and it allows you to process it a little bit differently. And so for some of you who may have struggled with math in the past, kinesiology and biomechanics can give you a context to better internalize that math, or practice that math in a different way that you enjoy. Give a plug there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, kinesiology doesn't have a lot of math, and certainly sort of seeing the examples is very, very helpful for understanding the math as well as the physics, which is, kind of inherent in biomechanics. Generally speaking, kinesiology folk are person, hands-on type of people. So once you start putting those things in context, the math and the physics becomes a lot easier for individuals to get. And in terms of how much math do you really need, I mean, undergrad degree was in kinesiology. I started off as maybe a physics or engineering major, so I had Calc 1, Calc 2, took a couple years off of math, and then was in grad school, decided I needed some more math. I took a few more semesters of math, which has helped me certainly from a research perspective. But on a day-to-day basis, most of the research I do does not involve that heavy level of math. It helps me to be able to talk to other biomechanists, certainly, and we can discuss things from a computer modeling perspective, which you do need a bit of math for. But there's a lot of research you can do in the biomechanics field that does not require high levels of math. It's helpful, certainly, yes. Is it required? I would say no. You don't have to have math. It's not an exclusion criteria.
Great. So I heard math, I heard physics, I heard statistics, which makes me happy. But I also, I guess the obvious is, of course, is your biology class is correct. And I can imagine an anatomy class could also be very beneficial as well to this field, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so, from a historic perspective, in high school, I took advanced physics and advanced math and advanced chemistry. Didn't like the biology at all. So I didn't take the advanced biology, and look where I'm at now. So I think if you're looking at coming out of high school prepared, I would say push yourself to take the math and the physics so you are not scared of it. So being terrified of those things then shuts doors for you, which means you would never go in those directions, right? I mean, I took a high school biology and completely eliminated, but I only took 1 year as opposed to 2 of chemistry and physics. So making sure you have a well-rounded background, so when you come to college, then you have the opportunity to say, oh yes, I've done this before. I mean, students will put off biomechanics class for as long as possible because they're terrified of physics or math, which, is hard for us to hear personally. Right. So you have a well-rounded background coming out of high school. I think it makes it a lot easier, and for any degree, honestly.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to all of our presenters today for chatting with us. Special thank you to all of you for joining us today for our celebration here at Penn State Berks of National Biomechanics Day. As you click out of the webinar, you will receive access to another survey. If you do take a few minutes to fill that out, give us some feedback on what you thought of today's presentation. That can give us some insights for future chats that we might be planning as well. So you're encouraged to reach out to us via email if we can be of any support, and we remind you to keep checking our LionSide Chat website as we continue to add more chats. If you know anybody interested in accounting, that's our next chat on April 9th. And then we also have a fun presentation about the pathways to the beetles from one of our faculty members here coming up as well. So be sure to come back, check with us, meet with our faculty, staff, and students to learn more about our exciting majors and experiences here at Penn State Berks. Stay safe, Berks and beyond. Signing off until next time. This has been the LionSide Chat Network. Thank you so much. And thanks to the presenters. Have a great National Biomechanics Day.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.